I refused to join the IDF a year ago and I was imprisoned. In Israel, every Jewish citizen is supposed to enlist at the age of 18. It's mandatory after high school. I refused to join the military because it commits genocide and because I don't want to be a part of the system of occupation and oppression of the Palestinian people. The majority of the opposition to Netanyahu does not accept the reality that Israel has committed genocide in Gaza. The majority of the opposition is not against the genocide because it does not recognize it, and the majority of the opposition is okay with the occupation.
In Israel, it's quite comfortable to enlist and it's quite normal to enlist. Many people just, even if they are not genocidal, there are those people, the fascists, you have those, but even if they are not, they are just enlisting out of normalcy and just out of their parents and their friends enlisting and being in the army as well.
After you turn 18, after finishing high school, you get from the IDF as a Jewish Israeli citizen, you get an enlistment date, a date where you are due to go to the enlistment base nearby your residence. If we don't go there and just stay home, they will just come to our house at some point. Then we are put in a temporary arrest cell for a few hours. And after a few hours, we're taken to a military trial. And then she berates us for a few minutes, saying that we're traitors and a shame to our country and whatever. And then she sentences us. Since the 7th of October, the minimum is pretty much 30 days. The thing is that after we are sentenced, we are taken to the prison, we spend our prison sentence. And after being released, we have a few days at home and then we get a new enlistment date. And then you go to the enlistment base again and you have to refuse again. And you go through the same process again and again. The 2 million Palestinians, citizens of Israel, are not obliged to enlist because they are the victim of the apartheid system that the military is enforcing. So it is absolutely a weaponizing of our privilege, because it is using this position of being Israelis from a privileged enough background to allow ourselves to do this publicly in order to problematize this issue of military service and of the occupation and apartheid and genocide, to make a story out of it, because this is a very sensational thing that a young person is going to prison for not doing this very normal thing.
It's not that the Italian state and Europe and the United States is not involved. It's that they are involved in the wrong way and that they are involved and complicit. What will change both Israelis' minds and in the end free Palestine is boycotts and divestments and making the situation uncomfortable, making apartheid uncomfortable to support and uncomfortable to live in.
Hi to everybody. We are here in Naples, Italy. There was a meeting with 2 activists of Mesarvot, at Keidar, Greenberg, and Iddo Elam that we have here. We are in the Community Center 081. Iddo, thank you very much for being with us. You are a conscientious objector. You served time in prison because you refused to serve in the military. It should be natural, in my view, to refuse to serve in an army that is committing genocide and it's historically involved in occupation. But it's not that the case, because as you said before, most of the people who does not serve in the military is considered a traitor or a second-class citizen. So, can you, there are many ways of being exempted from the service or to refuse the service. Can you talk about your specific case and more in general, how it works?
So in Israel, every Jewish citizen is supposed to enlist at the age of 18. It's mandatory after high school. I refused to join the IDF a year ago and I was imprisoned. I refused to join the military because it commits genocide and because I don't want to be a part of the system of occupation and oppression of the Palestinian people. There is many ways to refuse, many ways to not go to the military. Our case is that we publicly refuse to join for political reasons, and the military does not accept that, and that's why we are imprisoned. But you do have also people that just get exempted from the military on many different bases: mental health, physical health, unfit to serve. But it's quite hard for many people to get exempted, and that's the reason that many people in the end up in prison, even if they didn't plan to. For my case, I plan to go to the prison because for me, it's quite important to do it publicly and to make a protest out of my not enlisting in general. Yeah.
And there is a narrative in Israel about the genocide. It's said that it's basically the fault of Netanyahu and fascists and fanatics like Ben Gvir and Smotrich. Do you think that liberal Zionists and institutional parties on the left, especially the one on the Knesset, they really want the end of occupation, or they want just like a soft version of occupation that basically maintains the status quo?
The majority of the opposition to Netanyahu does not accept the reality that Israel has committed genocide in Gaza. The majority of the opposition is not against the genocide because it does not recognize it, and the majority of the opposition is okay with the occupation. They might say that they are pro-peace, they might say that they want some kind of, peaceful future, but in the end, the main narrative of liberal Zionism is that Netanyahu is the problem and the far right is the problem, and they are the solution, even though they don't want Palestinian freedom and even though they don't want the end of the occupation. There is a very small amount of opposition that truly wants the end of the occupation, and that's the very small far left opposition, that it's Palestinian mostly.
And are they in the Knesset, some of them?
Yes, you have 5 members from the Hadash-Tal coalition, which includes the Communist Party in it. You have 1 Jewish member of the Communist Party in the Knesset, and you also have the Islamic Party, which is Palestinian, but it's a very complicated case. In general, the majority of opposition to the occupation within the Knesset is Palestinian, with a small Jewish minority that also supports the end of the occupation, but it's around, a few dozen seats from 120. The majority of people in the Knesset agree on the occupation and agree on the, continuing the oppression of the Palestinian people. They just don't agree on the way to do it.
And Israeli scholars like Nurit Peled Elanan, I hope I didn't misspell her name, argue that Zionist and the Israeli segregated school system exploit fear and trauma of the Holocaust to indoctrinate youngsters and to perpetuate the occupation. What's your take on that?
I think that the schooling system is very complicit in the indoctrination of Jewish citizens to the point that they accept the reality and that they are thinking of the occupation as non-existent or as okay. And many people think that going to the army is just normal because we are taught this history that is very through the narrative of the Holocaust happened, and because of the Holocaust and because of historical anti-Semitism that did truly exist, the only solution is Zionism. The only solution is the Israeli state, the ethno-state in Palestine. There's no other way for Jews to be safe. We don't accept this. We think that the lesson from the Holocaust and the lesson from anti-Semitism is to be against racism in general and to be against genocide in general. The fact that the Holocaust happened doesn't mean that different genocides are okay. The result that we see and that we promote is that never again for everybody, never again for all people. Palestinians shouldn't suffer, Jews shouldn't suffer, any person should be free, and none of us can be free until we free the other.
Last question. What do you want to say to international activists? What they should do? Especially, what do you want to say to those people? Also, maybe they're not activists, but they think that protesting is useless, that at the end, the powerful people are going to decide. What do you want to say to them?
I think that being political is a necessity in life right now. I think that we see more and more how politics and about how globalism and how the ruling class controls everybody's life, even if you're not political, even if you're not an activist. In general, protests do matter. organization do matter. We saw that in Italy with the general strikes for Palestine, which were very powerful, both for us and our Palestinian friends that saw it and got a glimpse of hope and of re-energizing from seeing people across the world protesting against the genocide that was happening in our backyard. And in general, there is real life consequences to this. When you strike, when you stop being complicit, when you stop and strike, for example, in the ports, and not let shipments of arms get to Israel, you see how the ruling class is afraid. And you see how the ruling class will resort to violence in order to stop it. Because the only way to stop the ruling class from controlling our life, the only way to stop a genocide is to force it to stop, is to force it by protesting, by organizing, by striking, by using all tools imaginable to stop the genocide. Because like has been said many times in the past, the ruling class and the political elite will not give up their power. We have to force them to give up their power. And what we saw in Italy is amazing. And my main message is just continue, escalate, continue with this protest, continue with this organizing. Not just, strike or block a port for one day, but create the reality in which you can strike and block ports for a whole week, for a whole month. This way to continue fighting will result in real-life change, and these boycotts and the investments and all of this struggle will result in the end in a free Palestine.
Hi, thank you for having us here. My name is Iddo. I'm 19 years old. I'm a conscientious objector, or a refusenik as we call them. And I've been an activist against the occupation for the past 5 years.
Hi, my name is Elam. I'm 18 years old. I'm an activist and refusenik. In March of this year, I refused to enlist to the Israeli military and was sent to a month in military prison where I was kept in solitary confinement. So to explain a bit about what refusal even is, in Israel, under Israeli law, all Jewish Israeli citizens are obliged to enlist after the age of 18, after having finished high school. This law has been around since 1948, and accordingly, the first recorded cases of refusal were in May of 1948. So as long as there's been a military in the state, there's been refusal to take part in it. So the refusal movement in a very broad way has existed pretty much since 1948, but specifically the Mesarvot network, which me and Iddo are both a part of. Mesarvot is Hebrew for the female plural form of the verb to refuse. The Mesarvot network has existed since 2016, and the goal and practice of the Mesarvot network is to provide more concrete and institutional ways and networks of aid and support for refuseniks that previously were much more word to mouth. So this includes legal aid to refuseniks with lawyers who represent them to get us out of jail. And this includes psychological aid and, most importantly, a community of other refuseniks who either went through the same experience in the past or know that they will go through it in the future, to support refuseniks as they go through this difficult experience of being sent to prison.
Besides our activism within the Mesarvot network and our continuation to support the next generation of refuseniks, both me and Ella are very active in youth organizing. We are both active in the youth movement of the Young Communist League, which is Palestinian-led and active in the 48 territories, so not in the West Bank in Gaza, only in the Israeli state. It has both Palestinians active and Jewish branches as well. It's the biggest youth movement, political youth movement for Palestinian citizens of Israel, and it's the only youth movement for Jews, which is explicitly anti-Zionist. We organize weekly meetings for young people, talking with them about the history of Palestine, about the occupation, about the Zionist movement, about political theory, about how to organize and how to be activists in order to create the next generation of activists. And together both the Mesarvot network and the Young Communist League and many other organizations. We work within what we call the anti-occupation bloc and organize weekly protests against the occupation, and in the past 2 years against the genocide in Gaza, in which we try to organize within Tel Aviv protests against the occupation, connecting the general movement against the government, which is very liberal and very doesn't talk about the occupation, to the fact that we are putting millions of people under military occupation. And we organize protests with our Palestinian comrades in a joint struggle, basically, of Jews and Palestinians against the occupation and against the genocide, and also against the growing police repression of anti-occupation activism in general, specifically on Palestinian organizing within the state.
Apart from protests and youth organizing and refusal, of course, the main forms of our activism as Israeli anti-Zionist activists are direct actions and something called protective presence or solidarity activism. Direct actions, I think many here know what that means. They are concentrated efforts by a number of activists to try and block or disrupt different parts of the machinery of the occupation. One example of this is a few months ago, in coordination with the global Sumut flotilla that was heading to Gaza at the time to try and break the siege. Me, along with around 200 other Israeli anti-Zionist activists, went at the same time to the land border with Gaza from the Israeli side. It's like a reserve soldier refreshment point on the border with Gaza, where reserve soldiers come in civilian clothing, in civilian cars, change to military uniform, and enter Gaza in military cars. So we got there with civilian cars, which, I mean, it was very usual to see civilian cars there, so it surprised the military. And we surprised them. And 16 of us managed to enter, symbolically at least, breaking the siege and bypassing the Israeli blockade before around 200 meters into the Gaza Strip being stopped by soldiers. And the other 200 of us, for around 2 hours, which was the duration of the protest, we continued protesting in that entry point, practically blocking the military vehicles from being able to get in and out of the strip. And the other main thing that we do, that I spend most of my time doing, is something called protective presence or solidarity activism, which is where Israeli activists and also many international activists go particularly to the C area of the West Bank, the Area C, which is the majority of the land in the West Bank, officially under full control of the Israeli state and military. So meaning the Palestinian Authority, unlike areas B and A, has no official jurisdiction in that area. And in that, around 60% of the land in the West Bank, for the past few decades, the Israeli state has been waging a continuously escalating campaign of ethnic cleansing against the residents that has seen much further escalation during the past few years, and especially, of course, during the past 2 years since the start of the genocide. So this includes various different tactics. They have also really changed over the years. This sort of activism of protective presence of Israeli and international activists going to these communities has been around for around 25, 30 years in certain areas of the West Bank. And the tactics that we used have changed a lot, basically depending on the sort of tactics and violence that is utilized by the regime. So we use different tactics when they act in different ways. During specifically the past 2 years, more and more of our activity has been mostly documenting the various crimes of the Israeli regime in these areas, anything from very violent and even deadly settler violence, supported and protected by the military, so sometimes joined by the military, to home demolitions, to arbitrary arrests, and generally being present in these situations, sometimes to de-escalate them, sometimes to translate, sometimes even just to use the fact that as Israeli citizens, when we call the police because the settler is doing something, they will reach the situation much faster than if a Palestinian calls them. Generally being there to support and resist alongside with the residents and support their steadfastness on their lands, to try to slow down or prevent as much as possible the ongoing cleansing of these areas.
To conclude, before I think maybe more people are talking or just questions, we have been doing now a tour in Italy. This is the last event. We are excited to be here with you in Napoli and excited also to go back home to the land to continue the fight on the ground. In general, both in the Mesarvot network with our refusal and in general in all the forms of activism that Ella and I mentioned, it's very critical for us, the ideology which is behind it, which is clear anti-Zionism, clear anti-decolonial thought, clear anti-occupation stance, because together with the Palestinians that we work with, we try our best to use the fact that we're born in Israel, because we didn't choose that, in order to better the conditions in the land and better the life in the land. We cannot stop the genocide on our own, unfortunately, and we cannot build a mass movement right now. But the small efforts that we make and the efforts that we do succeed in slow down the process of ethnic cleansing, of genocide and of occupation. In the end, what we ask you and what we ask in general in this whole time in Italy is the support of the Italian people, but also just the stop of intervening in the land and the stop of intervening in the conflict, because it's not that the Italian state and Europe and the United States is not involved. It's that they are involved in the wrong way and that they are involved and complicit. So we, in the end, how do you say, we in the end talk mostly about the fact that in order to see a real change in Palestine, in order to see the end of the occupation, we are not waiting for 50, 100, 100,000 more Israelis to change their minds. That will not free Palestine. That will not happen as long as being pro-genocide and pro-occupation is comfortable for Israelis. What will change both Israelis' minds and in the end free Palestine is boycotts and divestments and making the situation uncomfortable, making apartheid uncomfortable to support and uncomfortable to live in. That is what changed in South Africa, and this is what will change in Palestine in the end. Excuse me for my blubbering. That's it. I think that for us, I mean, every person has a different story of how he came to refuse, how she came to refuse. For me, during the lockdown of 2019, 2020, I just had a lot of time at home and I started researching about politics. I was quite lucky to have discovered anti-occupation voices and learn about occupation. I decided to join activism. I met a few anti-occupation groups. After joining activism and meeting Palestinians for the first time that are my age and speaking with them, it was quite clear to me that I will not be a part of the system of the army and that I want to make a public statement about it, refusing publicly to protest the occupation. We are quite lucky in the sense that we were 1 month in prison. Many of our comrades have spent even 6 months in prison, and the majority of Refuseniks spent more time than 1 month. In the early 2000s, you even had like 5 refuseniks that spent 2 years in prison. This changes from person to person just because of the army's personal policy and personal interest in whether or not keeping a person longer in prison or releasing them.
So yeah, I mean, this decision is reached in various different ways, and what we try to do with our youth organizing is not necessarily convince people that are completely disconnected from us. We don't go out into the street and shout at people that Zionism is a settler colonial project and that they must join the struggle against white supremacy. But we try to make our spaces that offer this alternative education that, again, is not reachable or present at all in schools or public media. We try to make these alternative spaces of education as accessible as possible to people who are even slightly interested. So someone may go to some punk show in a political space, not necessarily for its politics, and meet activists there or see all the posters that are on the wall and be even slightly interested and come to a meeting and then come to the next meeting a week after that. And within a few months, they will be active and involved themselves. And so we don't really try to reach people because in that way, because there isn't ready-made formula for how to make radical anti-Zionist 14-year-olds. It's more to try to make what we offer, which is a community and ways to get involved and become active and learn how to do these things and to understand the world around us. We try to make these things that we offer as accessible as possible. So the prison we're sent to is a military prison. It is a disciplinary military prison. Basically all the inmates in that prison, other than us, are soldiers who performed some kind of disciplinary crime, being late to base or smoking weed inside the base or being disrespectful towards an officer, and some people who are draft evaders, usually for personal reasons, that managed to avoid conscription for a few years and then get caught and get usually sentences of a few months. And this prison is designed to discipline people, kids, many of them are age, some a bit older, into reintegrating them into the military system. So most of the inmates are soldiers who are unruly or undisciplinary in some way, and the military is almost, and the prison is almost like a boot camp. There are military drills multiple times a day. You are required to, you have a very clear schedule. It's all in a military setting. You don't refer to the guards as guards, you refer to them as officer. It's like a very harsh and very strict boot camp in order to, after a few months of imprisonment, reintegrate these people into the military system. So us as refuseniks, we go to the enlistment base on the date of our enlistment. Maybe I'll let you translate and then I'll continue. So after you turn 18, after finishing high school, you get from the IDF as an Israeli citizen, a Jewish Israeli citizen, you get an enlistment date, a date where you are due to go to the enlistment base nearby your residence and go through a series of like intake processes of vaccines and getting a uniform and so on, and become a soldier. So refuseniks usually get to the enlistment base on their enlistment date. If we don't go there and just stay home, they will just come to our house at some point, and usually that way you get harsher sentences. So most of us just prefer to get it done with and go to the enlistment base. Then rather than go through all this process, we say, no, I refuse. Usually it confuses the intake officers quite a bit because they are going through hundreds of new recruits during that day, and suddenly there is one person who says, no, I refuse. Then we are put in a temporary arrest cell for a few hours. And after a few hours, we're taken to a military trial, which is not really a military trial. We're put in front of a high-ranking military officer that was responsible for the enlistment of new recruits. And then she berates us for a few minutes, saying that we're traitors and a shame to our country and whatever. And then she sentences us on the basis of the crime what we're sentenced on is the refusal of the order to enlist. So we're treated as soldiers who refused an order. And usually the punishment for that sentence is, since the 7th of October, the minimum is pretty much 30 days. The thing is that after we are sentenced, we're taken to the prison. We spend our prison sentence there with the military training and so on. And after 30 days, we're released, or more or less, whatever. And after being released, we have a few days at home, and then we get a new enlistment date. And then you go to the enlistment base again, and you have to refuse again. And you go through the same process again and again. And that's how some of our friends spend even 6 months in prison in periods of between 30 to 45 days. We are lucky because after our first imprisonment, only one, we got exempted, which is the only way to get out of this cycle and not return to prison. You have to get exempted from military service. And that there are many ways to do, and that is what we have our legal team for, to get us this exemption in order to not return to prison. And so refusal is not easy or fun. And again, me and Iddo are very fortunate. I mean, most refuseniks, their time in prison, again, more than a month usually, is very isolated from the outside world. You are confined to the prison for your entire sentence. You get only 7 minutes of phone calls a day that you usually are not able, sometimes you are not able to actually get because there are many, many inmates that are trying to get their phone calls. Sometimes you work. If you get a military job, it's like a privilege because you get to go out of your cell, but it's also very tiring. And it's mostly very, very boring and tiring because you have this constant military discipline. They are trying to make you comply. I personally also had a bit of a different experience because I was not only isolated from the outside world, I was also isolated from the rest of the inmates. During my month in prison, I was kept in solitary confinement because I'm a trans woman, and the IDF have an internal policy that dictates all trans inmates be kept separated from all other inmates. So during the 30 days I spent in prison, for around 22 hours a day, I was kept separated from all other inmates. Very hard, rightfully considered a form of torture. But the point that I'm trying to get at is that it is hard, and me and Iddo are, again, specifically lucky as refuseniks, but it is also a privileged position because we come from a supportive enough of a background and accepting enough of a community in order to allow ourselves to even do this publicly. Many of our friends refuse anonymously, not because they don't agree with our politics, but because they are scared, because it is a very scary thing. And many refuseniks are rejected by their families and rejected by their communities when they refuse. Many refuseniks lose contact with their families. And even more so, we're privileged in the position where we are even required to enlist, because this is only a position we're put in as Jewish Israelis. The 2 million Palestinians, citizens of Israel, are not obliged to enlist because they are the victim of the apartheid system that the military is enforcing. So it is absolutely a weaponizing of our privilege because it is using this position of being Israelis from a privileged enough background to allow ourselves to do this publicly in order to problematize this issue of military service and of the occupation and apartheid and genocide, to make a story out of it, because this is a very sensational thing that a young person is going to prison for not doing this very normal thing. Israeli media is very preoccupied with it. International media is very preoccupied with it. We do protests. And for this reason, we're able to use this sensational stage to talk about the occupation, to talk about the apartheid, and to make this possibility known. Because many young people in Israel are not even aware that not enlisting is a possibility. Every time someone enlists, new people, every time someone refuses, new people contact the Mesarvot network and write to us that because they heard about this person, they even heard about this possibility and didn't enlist or refuse themselves or got involved in activism.
So this answer has two parts. In our activism within the Israeli state, yes, we have a lot of connections with Palestinians. Specifically, I'm talking about Palestinian citizens of Israel. Most of our activism is together with Palestinians just by the natural reality that the majority of people against the occupation between the river and the sea are Palestinians. In order to create a mass movement against occupation, we must work with our natural partners as well. So a lot of our organizing of protests is in Palestinian towns in the north of the country, in order to be a bigger protest in general, but also to support our Palestinian comrades with our presence and with our and sometimes, even within the Israeli state, the presence of Israelis and the presence of a more bigger protest can protect the protest from police violence. In general, in the past 2 years, we have seen heightened police violence all across the country, not only especially against our Palestinian friends, but also just in general against everybody that's protesting against the occupation. So the smaller the protest, the more violent it gets usually, the more repression and arrests usually we see. So this means that even in the start of the genocide, we had protests of 50 people in which 14, 20 people got arrested for no reason. And now that we have, that we try and create these more bigger, broader coalitions with Palestinian organizations and occupation organizations, it can sometimes protect ourselves from police, because when there's thousands of people together, it's difficult. I will only add that for me as well, in my process of starting being active, it was very important meeting these Palestinians for the first time, because Israeli society is very segregated. Not as official policy, it's not that we have different bus seats and different bathrooms for ethnicities, but usually you grow up in a Jewish area or a Palestinian town and it's not mixed. I grew up in Tel Aviv, I grew up with only Jews around me, and I didn't know any Palestinians besides, sometimes meeting people who are workers, who are working in my school or in restaurants. This is not real meetings. For me, meeting Palestinians my age that care about the same things that I do and working with them for the first time really emphasized how clear this struggle is and how right it is. For me, it was a very big part in me deciding to refuse in the end. And for me as well, once I refused, and many Palestinian comrades came to support me, we organized a solidarity protest with me and another Refusenik, early morning in Tel Aviv, and a few dozens Palestinians came to show their support and protest with us. For me, it only made more clear that I'm on the right path. And this is something that is not only a Palestinian struggle, but my struggle as well. And that for me, it's important as well. And for me, it's personal as well. Because we are so ingrained in this struggle that it's not only ideological at this point. It's not that we just, don't want to take part in genocide. It's that this system is oppressing our friends. This system is killing people that we fight with. This system, in general, is for us something personal issue.
I have many different diverse relationships with many different Palestinians. I have Palestinian friends who are activists who I work with. I have Palestinian activist partners who are not necessarily my personal friends. And I have Palestinian friends who are not at all activists. And generally, I think partnership between Jewish Israelis and Palestinians, both in 48 and also between Israeli activists and Palestinians in the West Bank, is generally a very difficult thing, especially during the past 2 years, and also generally since very big ethnic riots and pogroms and lynches that were happening in 2021 towards Palestinian citizens of Israel. So many networks of so-called Jewish, Arab, Palestinian, Israeli joint struggle and so on were very limited after that. And generally, it changes from place to place. Like in Mesarvot, for example, that I'm very active in, there have been Israeli activists like myself for 20 years now, more even. So when I go there, it's not really a special thing that I'm Israeli. It's not, people are not very surprised to hear that I'm Israeli. But for example, the village of Farha, in the area of Salfit, I first went there around 2.5 years ago. And I only started being very active with the residents and the village committee in the past year or so, or a year and a half. And being a refusenik really helps in many ways, because it is this sort of first stage of trust, of this proclamation that we are in the same struggle and I am committed enough to the struggle that I am willing to sacrifice certain things. And I think this is a very comfortable way to establish trust with Palestinians that don't necessarily know me and know that I have good intentions and so on. So generally, I think being refuseniks really helps in that sort of partnership with Palestinians. Yes, I mean, sometimes there are issues with being Israeli, not necessarily with people we're active in. I mean, in some spaces, I won't scream that I'm Israeli. In some villages, I know that I'm Israeli because certain people from the village that invited me know that I'm Israeli and know me personally and invited me, but not necessarily everyone is happy to have me there. And it's understandable, yeah. I mean, I think it changes quite a bit from place to place, and there are many different relationships, but basically all of our activism is many different ways of joint struggle, because there's the very built, very structured, already existing 100-year-old networks of joint struggle of the Communist Party that is majority Palestinian but has always had Jewish members. And is mostly in 48, and then there's the activism in the West Bank that is a bit younger, but also in many places very, very old. And then some places where the first Israelis to come in this context to this village, and the only Israelis that these people have ever previously met are soldiers or settlers. And in that situation, it's a bit more complicated, but then again, having this sort of interaction in the context of struggling together with the same goal is a very good way, I think, to form these relationships.
Okay, I would start by how many are we? Not a lot, not enough. That's the simple question. We cannot know officially how many people don't go to the military, because that's only in the hands of the IDF, and they do not release these numbers. Every year we ask for these statistics, but we don't get them. In Mesarvot, in the past 2 years, since the start of the genocide, since the 7th of October, till now, we helped a bit over 30 refuseniks. This means refuseniks that went to prison and for political reasons and did a campaign around it. So it's a bit different than a different kind of refuseniks. We have many activists who didn't go to prison, that didn't go to the military, and found some other way to get, exempted quietly. Not everybody can allow themselves to go to the prison or do a public campaign. And in general, the estimations of how many 18-year-olds that were supposed to enlist didn't enlist since the 7th of October, it's a few thousand, but we cannot truly know. the majority still enlist. I think this connects to something that we said, that in general, people just do what is comfortable for them. And in Israel, it's quite comfortable to enlist, and it's quite normal to enlist. Many people just, even if they are not genocidal, there are those people, the fascists, you have those, but even if they are not, they are just enlisting out of normalcy and just out of their parents and their friends enlisting and being in the army as well. I will let the translator continue. The question of religious refusal is a bit complicated. In general, you have the ultra-Orthodox in Israel. They are the very religious communities. The majority of them are exempted from military service. This is a very long story through history to take you through, but in general, the majority just don't go to the military and are getting exemptions. Then you have those that do enlist. You have religious people that decide to enlist because they are more nationalistic religious people. And then you have also anti-Zionist religious folks. Some of them are sent to prison because they don't go to the military, because it's a very convoluted story of who gets exemptions and who doesn't. But you have religious people who don't get the exemption and are forced either to enlist or they refuse and go to prison, both from more mainstream sides of the ultra-Orthodox community. Even if they are Zionists, sometimes they don't want to enlist for religious reasons, and many from the anti-Zionist Orthodox community that is less accepted by the Israeli state. We have some connections with them, not a lot, because they are coming usually from very religious reasons and religious backgrounds, and this is a community that is very segregated and doesn't really speak with the more secular sides of society. But our lawyer, for example, in Mesarvot, helps some of them as well through their imprisonments. And we do try our best to connect with whoever wants to connect on the question of occupation and not going to the military, but it's quite difficult.
Regarding the question about the queer struggle and the instrumentalizing of queer people in the Israeli pinkwashing, I think Israeli pinkwashing is not very unique generally in Israeli propaganda. I don't think. I mean, of course, pinkwashing is very present in Israeli propaganda, but it's just another point in a plethora of points that the general gist of them are: we are cultured, we are liberal, we are enlightened, and we are in a jungle of crazy Islamic terrorists or whatever. Like, this is generally the imperial colonial playbook of saying that we are so cultured and smart and liberal and democratic compared to these savages. And the queer issue is one of the tools of this, but also we can see this with women's rights and democracy and secularism and generally many issues, even like ecology, like everything everything that they can use to paint the Palestinians as backward savages and the Israelis as some enlightened villa in the jungle. That is usually the framing of Israel. We learned this in school, that we are a villa in the jungle. But then apart, I mean, pinkwashing is almost purely apart from the general complicity, which should be fought similarly to all other complicity, like in pride organizations and like in all corporations and so on. Apart from the rhetoric of pinkwashing, I think it's important. I mean, there is also a struggle. For 20 years now, every year during Pride Month, Israeli anti-Zionist queer activists like myself have done various disruptive actions, whether that be an anti-pinkwashing block within the Pride Parade or some sort of disruptive action disrupting the Pride Parade. And generally, I think it's also important to not, in response to this instrumentalization, to idealize Palestinians. Palestinian society generally is very diverse, but also in most parts of it, very religious and very conservative. And the first and foremost victims of this, unlike the Israeli state wants you to think, are not white queer people in the West or Israeli queer people. They are Palestinian queer people, which the Israeli state doesn't discriminate in its killing. And I mean, I as a queer person, as an anti-Zionist Jewish queer person in a mostly Palestinian struggle, personally I'm in a bit of a precarious position in this, because I have the few days a year where me and my queer anti-Zionist friends do some cool action, but other than that, there isn't some mass anti-establishment, anti-commercialized, anti-Zionist queer movement. And the small Palestinian queer movements are just not for me, understandably so. But I mean, in many parts of my activism, like in the West Bank, I am closeted. And I don't think we should hide that. I mean, the communities I work with are mostly very Muslim, very conservative communities that I do not feel comfortable, for good reason, to be out of the closet in. And this is not, I mean, I didn't come to educate anyone, first of all. But more importantly, it's not from some essentialistic idea of like this indigenous cultural norms are better and we don't need to force it on there are also queer people in Mesarvot, and they suffer the most from this conservativeness that I personally happen to suffer from. But it's mostly that I have no way to affect it and I didn't come to affect it. But I think it is important to remember, I mean, the majority of my activism isn't per se queer activism. Because I am a part of a struggle that is not my own, and I'm fighting for the rights of another group of people that is not my own. And by the nature of being solidarity activism, we are limited in what we are able to do. Not only in the queer issue, there are many different things that working with different Palestinian communities I may not agree with concerning education of children or behavior towards animals or whatever. But this is just not an issue. I mean, first of all, it doesn't mean that they should be genocided. And second of all, I am there to resist with them the apartheid system that is oppressing them, and not to tell them that, I don't know, that girls can kiss too.
I will try and do it very shortly because, once again, it's very complicated. It's like internal IDF policy and internal bureaucracy. In general, there is a few ways to finally get exempted. There is a few kinds of exemptions. You have a mental health exemption, a physical health exemption, just an exemption on the grounds of being unfit to serve, or grounds of bad behavior, even once you're in the system, if they decide to just get rid of you. And technically there is also conscientious exemptions, because international law forced Israel to have this, but it's not completely true. And you have very, very few people that get that conscientious objector, title. In my case, for example, it wasn't possible. Usually they are given to a few people who are not activists, not public, not very political. Just like what the army searches for is this apolitical pacifist, this guy that doesn't care about the occupation and doesn't care about Palestine. He just doesn't want to hold a gun, just in general, and doesn't want to kill even a bug, In the end, in my case, for example, I got an exemption on the grounds of mental health. It took me, after 1 month in prison, it took me 2.5 months to finally get exempted. In those 2.5 months, every week I had to return to the enlistment base on 1 day's notice. That means they will just call me and say, come tomorrow. I am forced to come, of course. Then sometimes I slept there, sometimes stayed 15 hours there, sometimes it was short, sometimes long, just fighting with them about like not enlisting and not returning to prison. In the end, I met some military psychiatrist that yelled at me for 2 minutes and said that I'm not convincing him that I'm like, you know, should get exempted, but there is too much overload on the system and they don't want to deal with me, so just go home. So it was 2.5 months just to get yelled at by a supposed psychiatrist and go home finally. Many people are not so lucky, like we said, and don't get exempted even if they want to during their imprisonment, in the end spend a lot of time in prison.
I'll first answer the question about the release. I had quite a funny story because I eventually got exempted on the basis, I got a psychiatric exemption because of the report of a military psychiatrist that said on the report that she is exempting me because of the symptoms, the psychiatric symptoms that I exempted after a month in solitary confinement as a response to the condition of solitary confinement. And she also told me during the meeting that I didn't know this at the time, but that the symptoms that I was experiencing are basically universal among victims of solitary confinement, that I'm not like crazy. I was just going through a very horrible experience. She personally was quite nice. However, despite that being the cause for officially for my release, the army during my imprisonment repeatedly denied the fact that I was in solitary confinement, and despite repeated requests from both me and my lawyer, denied taking me out of solitary confinement and continuously claimed that I was actually not confined to my cell and not in solitary confinement and as free as all the other inmates. Sorry, I'll just quickly answer the question about anti-carceral politics. I didn't necessarily develop those in prison because I had those beforehand. I actually tried to get in the zine What About the Rapists into prison, and they didn't let me because they said it was obscene material. Generally, they censored a lot of books that I wanted to bring in, also Foucault. But yeah, I mean, there are there are prisons outside of prisons in solidarity, both with Refuseniks and with prisons of security, prisons of the Israeli state towards Palestinian prisoners. But there isn't a specifically anti-carceral movement. There is just, it's part of the broader anti-apartheid movement. But yeah, absolutely, burn every prison.
Okay, what happens if we don't get the exemptions is that, okay, in general, when we are released from prison, already on the day of release, even the evening before, we get a paper that says come back in 2 days, 3 days, depending if there is like a weekend in the between or something like that. But immediately there is just another enlistment date because they are not giving up on the fact that we are forced to enlist. They are not giving up on this universal law of Israeli Jews. We can try sometimes to delay it, but in the end we are just needing to refuse again. So we go back to the enlistment base, this time with no glamour, no protest, nothing like that, just hoping to either get released or there's people that also just go and refuse again because they don't care. They want more time in prison. But in general, if we are not getting exempted on that day, then sometimes they send you home and say, come back tomorrow, we'll see. But in general, it's just either exemption or more imprisonment, another trial and another sentence of 30 days or 45 days, depending on the specific case. And once again, this is how the person that spends many months in prison spends his time in prison, which is quite actually psychologically hard, because you go home for 2 days, then you go back to the military and you're like, okay, I'm going to prison again. Then you do this again and again and again, and you don't get to leave. Like those 2 days are quite haunting in the sense that like you just know that the prison is imminenting. And I think that even for us that got exemptions, we were in this constant like knowing that going back to prison is the main possibility, because most people don't get immediately exempted.
Did they ask about like diverse opinions within the anti-Zionist movement, or is there also fascist activists?
Also Zionist, fascist
Activists,
if you could.
Yes, there is absolutely a lot of fascist Zionist organizing. It's actually very much has been in a big growth and proliferation during the past few years. Previously they existed, but they weren't as organized as they are now. But nowadays, many protests that we organize get like blown up by fascists that get there. There's a specific activist that pays other people to come to certain places to like interrupt leftist stuff. They of course are not as at all basically repressed by police. There are clashes, but we usually try to not take part in violence, because usually we will lose in that, because they are first of all more than us, but also usually more supported by the state and sometimes armed, and generally fascists are scary. I got injured a few times during activism, but my most serious injury wasn't in the West Bank from soldiers or settlers, but in Tel Aviv in a protest.
Shortly on militarization, it's important to clarify that the military is just present everywhere. I mean, if we're talking about just walking in the streets, you see soldiers with guns and uniforms everywhere. If we are talking about, like, I mean, in Tel Aviv, you will just see it. I mean, Tel Aviv is considered a liberal city, and this liberal city will go to have a coffee and your barista will have a pistol in his pocket. Like, this is the life, the day-to-day life. So because it's so normal, I think the main cause of it is through the education system and through our schools. From a very young age, we just receive talks from soldiers, both like soldiers coming to your class and speaking on different military units, on trying to convince you to go to that unit or that unit in your future enlistment, or even Remembrance Day for fallen soldiers from your school, in which many families and soldiers come to your school, and that ceremony usually is mandatory and like you need to participate in it every year. And also just this thing that is called, for example, soldier teacher, which is these soldiers that their army service, usually 18, 19, 20-year-olds, their army service is within schools as basically helpers in the school, like teachers, mostly in low-income background schools, in which, because there's a very big crisis of lack of teachers. And those are also talking with us about the fact that if you have any question about our future military service, please come to my office and speak with me, ask me questions, etc. I will let you translate and I will finish. And the other main form is just the teaching of the national narrative. Obviously, because Israel is the Jewish state, then history class is based on Jewish history, but besides the Jewish history, which is presented in a very victimization lens, which, yes, I mean, there is a systematic anti-Semitism throughout history, but also we are not taught about any good parts of Jewish history, only about persecution. And then we are taught about the Holocaust only through the lens of, because of the Holocaust, because of this persecution, we need the state of Israel, and we need to continue this project, and we need to protect this country. We are not taught at all about any Palestinian suffering, about the Nakba of 48. We're not taught about any expulsion or forced expulsion of Palestinians during the several, during 48 or 67. And all of the wars are presented as, oh, the Arabs just hate us for no reason, and we protected ourselves and won. And with this all coming together, and also it's important to say that culture is centered around the military, with songs, plays, films, all centered around the military, and in general the news just presenting the military as like a truthful source and a truthful body, and everybody almost on the news is a former IDF officer or a current IDF officer. These all things coming together just mean that the military is the most normal thing in society. And not being in the military is being an outcast, and being a refusenik is being a traitor. So with all of these things coming together, it's quite clear and easy to understand why for many Israelis that don't have our privilege and don't have our education, different education, they just see it as normal. And that's why we also, once again, stress the importance of outside pressure, of international pressure, and of international sanctions, because it's quite hard to break this hegemony from the inside when, for Israelis, they see around the world that everybody supports them. Every country supports them. It's not weird if every country supports you. It's not wrong. Nothing wrong is happening if all of the world is staying silent. Only some people, you know, crazy anti-Semites are doing something about it, but yes.
Or self-hating Jews. If you're not 37, you might should be it.
Before we part ways and I go to smoke a cigarette, I will quickly give a plug. You can find the Mesarvot network on all social media, and we have a website also. That's MESARVOT. In that social media, there is a link tree in all of our bios. In that link tree, if you have a lot of money for some reason, you are welcome to donate to us. We are right now fundraising for the next year of legal support for the Refuseniks. And more importantly, considering the space that I'm in, you can also support through other means. Like in that link tree, there is also a link where you can write letters. Oh yes, there are refuseniks right now, like us, who are right now in prison. Our legal team can receive letters from that link. It's like a Google Docs where you can write letters. They print them out. They bring them to the refuseniks during lawyer visits. It's really, really important. Both me and Iddo got these letters while we were in prison from all around the world. For me personally, when I was in isolation, it was really powerful to have this support from people all around the world. You can say good job, or just like tell a funny joke, or say that you met us, or tell a bit about yourself. It really helps the refuseniks right now in prison. So please find a few minutes to do that if you can. And that's it. Thank you for having us. And